We've talked about military disasters two times before. First time it was the ancient era, and the second time it was the medieval era. You might have noticed that armies were absolutely massive in the ancient era, consisting of tens of thousands of men. In the medieval era, an army would be about 15,000 men strong. In the modern era, armies of some countries are counted in millions, but it's worth mentioning that there's a lot more people in the world today, and it is a lot easier to manage such a huge army thanks to the modern technology. Even though 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries are very different from one another, we'll throw them in the same video since we think that it may be more interesting that way. When talking about disasters, we're not talking about how many people died, but rather how significant the loss was and what it led to. The battles are, as before, ranked chronologically. Let's begin. Number 1. Great Siege of Malta. In the year 1565, the Ottoman Empire tried to invade the island of Malta, a very important strategic position which was held by the Knights Hospitaller, who were the absolute best when it came to port defense. The Knights had somewhere around 2,000 soldiers with the addition of 400 Maltese men, women, and children. With the addition of some Italian soldiers and slaves, the Knights had a grand total of 6,100 men, while the Ottomans had 40,000 men, but not all of them were soldiers. 4,000 of them were religious servants, and 6,000 are just marked as volunteers. We're not sure what the volunteers did, but maybe they did fight. Who knows? The Knights were aware that the Ottomans are coming to lay siege, so they harvested all the crops and poisoned all the water supplies outside the city so that the Ottomans couldn't take any supplies. The Turkish Armada arrived on Friday, the 18th of May, but the first fighting broke out a day later. The Ottomans were sure that it would take them only a few days to destroy St. Elmo. It took them some time to mount all their guns, and at the end of May, the bombardment had started. Before that, the Knights made some last-minute improvements to their defenses. On the 23rd of June, the Turks took control of St. Elmo. The defenders made a heroic last stand, but all of them were killed, totaling over 1,500 men. However, the Ottomans paid a heavy price to capture St. Elmo, over 6,000 men, including half of their janissaries. The siege continued for 4 months, with fierce battles being fought for St. Michael and Burju and Fort St. Michael and Medina. On the 7th of September, the Knights finally got 8,000 reinforcements, later named as the Grand Relief Force. The Ottomans started retreating, and as they were retreating, they burned all nearby villages on their way. The Knights were having none of it and charged the Turks, massacring a huge number of them. Malta had survived the Ottoman assault. The Ottoman Empire, not so much. The siege resulted in a huge catastrophe for them. Although it was considered the most important battle of that time, modern scholars believe that there was a massive Spanish counterattack just waiting to retake the island if the Ottomans managed to capture it. Number 2. Battle of Vienna. It was the 14th of July, 1683, and the Ottoman army laid siege to the city of Vienna, which was held by the Holy Roman Empire. We'll just call them Viennese to make it easier for everyone, including ourselves. The Ottomans asked the Viennese to surrender, but they knew better. You see, the Ottomans already had a reputation for killing those who have surrendered. Long story short, the Ottomans made a breach in the city walls, so the Viennese prepared for a fight. On September 12, 1683, at 4 a.m., the Ottomans attacked. By noon, the Viennese had already come close to a breakthrough, but the Ottoman army held. In the early afternoon, the Polish infantry attacked the Ottoman right flank on the other side of the battlefield. Instead of taking care of the Polish, the Ottomans were determined to get into the city of Vienna. Charles of Lorraine and John III Sobieski decided to continue the offensive and finish the enemy. By 5 p.m., the Polish forces made great progress and took the nearby villages that were under the Ottoman control. The Polish cavalry slowly emerged from the forest to the cheers of the onlooking infantry who were expecting them. The Polish hussars entered battle and smashed the Ottoman lines. Around 6 p.m., the Polish hussars charged together with the Holy Roman Empire cavalry. History records this as the largest cavalry charge ever, counting over 18,000 horsemen. The charge easily broke the Ottoman lines, who started fleeing the battlefield. After the battle, Sobieski paraphrased Caesar's famous quotation saying, I came, I saw, God conquered. The Ottoman force was crushed. Number 3. The Battle of Trenton. It was the Christmas Eve of the year 1776. The Americans were ready to deal one of the most important blows to the British. The American morale was low at the time, and they desperately needed to win to show their fellow Americans that the British can be beaten. In the morning of the 26th of December, George Washington led the assault from the front. Soon they came to Trenton, which was occupied by the Hessian mercenaries. The Americans fired 3 volleys, and the Hessians returned 1. Soon, the battle turned fierce, and both the Americans and the Hessians were fighting like wild men, keeping up continuous fire and using houses for cover. Washington ordered the escape route to be cut off while they formed up their artillery. The American cannon stationed at the head of the 2 main streets soon came into action. The Hessians attempted to reorganize and to retake the town. Washington saw them approaching the American flank and moved his troops to meet them. After more fighting, the Americans came on top. Even though the battle was small, it had a huge effect. Americans now had the psychological dominance. The Battle of Trenton turned out to be a pivotal battle of the American Revolutionary War. Number 4. Napoleon's invasion of Russia. We're sure that all of you are familiar with the French invasion of Russia, so we'll keep it short. Let us know if you want an entire video on the topic, since there really is a lot to cover. We'll have to skip a lot of the details for now. On the 24th of June, 1812, Napoleon crossed the Niemen River with 680,000 soldiers in an attempt to defeat the Russian army. Napoleon pushed into Russia, winning minor engagements and a major battle at Smolensk. Napoleon hoped that that battle would win him the war, but the Russians kept slipping away and luring Napoleon deeper and deeper into the Russian territory. As they fell back, they used the scorched earth tactics, burning their own towns and villages to deprive Napoleon of gathering any supplies, forcing him to rely on his logistics, which took a long time to arrive in Russia. 70 miles from Moscow, the French caught up to the Russians near a small town named Borodino. The Russians had expected them to catch up and waited in well-defended positions. 72,000 men died that day in a narrow French victory. The Russian army slipped away once again, not allowing Napoleon to have his decisive victory he so desperately wanted. A week later, Russians burned down Moscow, further depriving Napoleon of supplies. Napoleon remained in Moscow for a solid month, expecting a peace treaty, which never came. We assume that Napoleon surely didn't know anything about Russian winners, or else he wouldn't waste time waiting around. Soon he realized what was about to happen, and he started retreating towards the Polish border. Now it was the Russians who were on a chase. The Russian winter came. Napoleon's army lost over 500,000 men, while the Russians lost around 400,000 men. Of course, that loss didn't matter that much to the Russians, since they weren't the ones who fought a war against the world. The campaign ended on December 14, 1812, after the last of the French troops left the Russian soil. Napoleon lost almost all of his troops, and it was the turning point of the Napoleonic Wars. Number 5. Battle of Waterloo. The Battle of Waterloo was fought on June 18, 1815. It was fought between Napoleon and the legendary Iron Duke Arthur Wellesley, 1st Duke of Wellington. Wellington says that at about 10 o'clock, Napoleon began his attack. The initial attack was held back by heavy British artillery fire. As the British guns were distracted, the second attack began, with troops engaging in a fierce melee battle, with the British coming out on top once again. Long story short, the French launched their first infantry attack, advancing all the way to British skirmishers. Both sides deployed in a line. Both sides took heavy casualties, but Napoleon was winning. Now it was time for the British cavalry to charge. The cavalry charge caused heavy casualties to the French, and it took them about 3 hours to reform their troops. Now the French cavalry charged, but they didn't have much success. After the second French infantry attack, it was becoming clear that the French lines fell. It didn't take long for the rest of the French troops to retreat. This battle led to Napoleon's exile to St. Helena, where he died 6 years later. We hope that you agree with our list. Sorry for skipping out on many of the details, but we didn't want to make a video that is an hour long. Let us know if you agree or disagree with our entries. Thanks for watching. Like the video if you think it's good, and share it with that one friend who likes this type of video. Subscribe if you want more of this stuff. We'll see you in the next video.